We are pleased and proud to have with us today Ozark native Marideth Sisco of West Plains, Missouri. Now, she is perhaps best known as the singer and roots music consultant for the Oscar-nominated film Winter's Bone. How many of y'all saw that movie? Fantastic. Cool. We were pleased to be the hosts for the Arkansas premiere of that movie, and that's where we first met Marideth. And she is also the lead singer in Blackberry Winter Band. We had several calls today, Marideth, or over the last week, asking if you were going to sing today. So you might have to belt something out just a cappella.
I'll do one.
All right, there you go. But she does have her music and books over here for you to look at and purchase after the program. But along with being a musician, what you may not know about Marideth Sisco is that she is also a veteran journalist, an author, a teacher, and a specialist in Ozark folklore. She hosts a radio show called These Ozark Hills, which airs on Missouri State University's KSMU public radio station. And she is here with us today, thankfully, joyfully, to share with us her observations on life in the Ozarks. Would you please join me in welcoming Marideth Sisco?
Thank you. Well, first thing I discovered, is this on? Can you hear me? First thing I discovered from her announcements was that I'm going to have to come back and see some of these programs. They've got Donald Harrington, my Lord. He wrote a book called The Architecture of the Arkansas Ozarks, and until then, I did not know that tomatoes were an aphrodisiac. And that explains the tomato canning factories all over the Ozarks, including one in Butterfield. Yeah. My Aunt Juanita used to tell me that she peeled tomatoes at 25 cents for a 5-gallon bucket. I did not know that there were side benefits on that. You wouldn't have thought it, Juanita. Anyway, the last time I gave this talk, I wandered off for 45 minutes on all the stories about Winter's Bone. Now, don't let me do that, because I got in trouble for it. They said, well, you were supposed to talk about the Ozarks. I said, well, they asked me about Winter's Bone. What could I do? I'm talking about the Ozarks. Well, God, the Ozarks. How is there some way to encapsulate all the things that we are, or even a good portion of what we are in 45 minutes? You can't do it. But I can hit some high spots, I think. And most of it has to do with the things that when I was growing up in the Ozarks, I didn't know. I didn't know those things. I didn't even know that there was any place but the Ozarks, which is peculiar since we traveled all over the United States, But I just thought everybody else had strange accents. And then I get home, and my friends say, you're really turning up that hillbilly business. We don't really have that much of an accent. I said, well, I do. I come from Butterfield. And you come from Butterfield, you're going to sound like everybody else in Butterfield, except for Arthur Rittenhouse, who was tongue-tied, and he did sound a little different. But he was such a sweet person. I mean, he was a lovely man. He was a farmer, and he's very kind, very generous, little round fellow that was always very happy to see you. But he couldn't talk worth darn. And so when we had a little grocery store there in Butterfield, and he'd come into the grocery store, and if he knew what he wanted, he'd just go and get it, and there wouldn't be much talk except "Hi, met it," and. But then once in a while he'd come in and he'd want something that he didn't know where it was, and then there was problems. He came in one day. I know it was the lunch hour, and I used to stay for the lunch hour and let my folks go have lunch together, and so I was in there by myself, and he come in and I said, Arthur, what can I do for you? And he said, I did subdue. I said, excuse me? He said, give me some dew. Arthur, I can't make it out. Dew, he said, I need dew. He made a little motion with his hands. And about the time my dad came in, I turned to him, I said, I can't understand him. And my dad said, Arthur, what can we do for you? He said, dew, I need some dew. my dad said, Arthur, I can't understand what you're saying. He said, do, goddammit, that's the thing to what to get with. Glue, okay. We got it. But from then on, for the next several decades, anywhere in the family, when somebody said something you couldn't understand, somebody in the background would say, dude, goddammit. But I didn't know, for instance, that the Ozark Mountains were the oldest hills in North America. I didn't know that. The Canadian Shield is older, but it was formed in the beginning of the planet, and so it doesn't really count as ranges of mountains. It's just a big rock up north. But the Ozark Mountains were ancient when the Rockies started to form. They were ancient when the Appalachians started to form. They're very, very old, and that's why they've worn down so far that they're hardly recognizable as mountains anymore. But they left some characteristics in that growing process that we don't normally hear about unless we study real specific things. If you're a botanist, you know that if you go over to Jam Up Cave in the edge of Shannon County, then you'll encounter plants that don't belong here. They should be way farther north. But they came down with the Ice Age. And they moved, those that survived moved ahead of the glaciers. And when they got to the Ozarks, they stayed around until the glaciers were gone. And then the climate was wrong for them. But Jam Up Cave has a huge cave mouth, and it faces straight north. The sun never gets there. And so it never warms up. And so those plants inside the edge of the cave there are plant communities that are different from anything else we know about in this part of the country. So that's one of the kind of marvels of the Ozarks here that we don't know. We don't know why it is that ginseng and things like plants like that are only here and in China. How'd that happen? How did that come about? We have pawpaws here. The only other members of that plant family are in South America. How did that happen? We don't know. So there's lots of things about the Ozarks starting out that are kind of a mystery, and it continued on that way into human settlement. You know, the first white people that came to this country they were told by the Indians that the Ozarks was a great place in the fall and the spring, and any other time you'd be crazy to live here. They just passed through and gathered up food and went on to where there weren't so many ticks and chiggers. It didn't get so damn hot and so damn cold, and all those other things that it gets. But we moved in here anyway, and the main reason we did, I think, is because being the Scotch-Irish that we are, Scotch-Irish are a fierce breed, and I didn't know where they came from either. I didn't even know where the term hillbilly came from. Anybody know why we're called hillbillies? Oh, I know, I can tell you. Back when William the Conqueror came across and whipped the ruling parties in the British Isles, the Scottish people, especially the Scottish people who had moved into Ireland and become the servant class there and were being treated badly there. The reason why Northern Ireland is fighting today is because of William the Conqueror. We all have Irish Alzheimer's. You know what that is? That's where you forget everything but your enemies. We've got that real bad, and so when those folks up in Northern Ireland started supporting William the Conqueror and saying this was a good idea, the people around in their slangy way started calling them Billy's boys. And so they came to this country, and they got to New York and said, "Oh, I don't think so," and headed out to the hills. And when they found places that reminded them of home, they'd settled there, and people referred to them as the hillbillies, and that's how that all started. So we carry a great burden of history on our backs, as do all the other peoples of the world. You have yourself and what came before you, and and you have an opportunity to learn from that. I'm not sure we always do. We'd rather fight than eat most of the time, but it's an interesting path that those bold people, or I'd say bold people. Let's be real about this. They were cranky people. They didn't get along with other people very well, and so when they got to the Ozarks, everybody else went around. They said that land's too rough and it's too rocky, and how would anybody live there? And they said, that's fine, nobody's going to follow us here. And they just came on in and settled and scratched out a living in the rocks, and they discovered that you could grow things like strawberries in the rocks. And the Ozarks was at one time known as the strawberry capital of America. You know why? They did, and they shipped them to St. Louis to the market. And the reason they were able to do that, or how they discovered that, was that even though it takes a year to grow a strawberry, and even though you have to tend that crop and mind it just almost as much as you would tobacco, it's the first money of the spring. It's the first cash money. And my Uncle Gus, who started the Strawberry Association in my hometown, said that's an important thing after a cornbread winter. And we probably can all translate that pretty well. But people came in here, and the first thing they did to the Ozarks was make it worse. They killed all the deer and all the turkey. They said they just went away. They didn't go away. We killed them and ate them. They didn't go away. We had to put them back, but they didn't go away. And then the next thing we did was let the timber barons know about all these forests full of tall yellow pine, and they cut down the forests, and they built Tulsa, and they built Oklahoma City, and they built Omaha, and all the first cities to the west were built out of Ozarks timber. Sometimes they said it was 60 feet to the first branch of those pine trees. Incredible. They could get one log on a wagon. And they cut them all off at the first branch, hauled the logs out, left what they called the slash. And it got dry, and it burned all the earth off the hilltops. And so all the rocks washed down in the creeks, and now we have rocky creek bottoms. And we say to the gravel companies, now don't disturb the creek bottom, that'll bother the ecology. As though that'd be the first time that it happened. I'm not that it's not a good thing to preserve what you have, that certainly. And it's good that things are regulated so we don't become North Carolina, for instance. Those poor people in West Virginia, my God, they've just lost those states. Coal ash. And people used to be sad because we didn't have any coal here. Not me. But, we have a rock pile. And they could grow corn and cotton in the bottoms. And actually, people did get some good corn crops out of these bottomlands. I had one fella tell me over by Dora that they got such a good corn crop, they figured it worked out to about 15 gallons an acre. But that was a long time ago. The only thing actually that the thing that rescued the Ozarks from poverty forever was a kind of a noxious little grass that causes the cows to get sore feet and gets in your garden and is hard to dig out, but it's fescue. It was the only thing they could find that would grow on steep hillsides and hold the hill together, hold the rocks together, and that cattle could graze on and get fat. And all of a sudden people could make a living here. What a thing. But you drive down these areas and you see the places where they've just cleared masses of woodland, and you think, oh my God, what have they done to our forests? Well, they're making a living. It's not... I'm glad I don't have that choice to make. Do I want my forest? Do I want to raise some cows and pay my bills? It's always a hard choice. Everything you do in this country costs you something. But they're tough people here. We grew up in those Northern Ireland counties and the moors of Scotland, and we had it hard. And the people in Scotland, we call ourselves Scotch Irish, and I want to see a show of hands of anybody who's got a Scottish name in their background, of their forebears. I got a Ferguson. Yeah. McDonald, yeah. Who's yours, Ellen? I can't remember, but I know it's... Well, let me ask a question that is only safe to ask in this generation, because generations before it would have been not safe to ask. How many people here count their Native American heritage? Quite a lot, yeah. Mostly Cherokee, some Osage. Anybody else? Any other tribes? Yeah. The Osage were here. The Cherokees came through and settled, dropped off the trail. My great-grandmother, that we called Granny Luke, came off the trail with her parents and was so good at covering their trail that it took me until last year, 2013, to find her, where she actually belongs in history. Through Ancestry.com, of all places. But they had traced the change of the name, because she was a Lovall, and there are no Lovalls in the Cherokee rolls. But her grandparents were Lavells, which was a Cherokee, and they made that leap that I couldn't make. The reason I knew she was Cherokee is because my great uncle Bood, whose full name was Boudinot, who was named after John Ross's son, Boudinot. First of all, why would you name a kid that? Boudinot, Uncle Bood. But then he told my older cousin before he died that he remembered the first day he went to school, when the kids all came out and danced around him in a circle and pointed their fingers at him and said, "Your ma's a squaw, your ma's a squaw." Another thing you wouldn't tell unless it was true, because it was such a shame. His brother, her son, offered to fight anybody who accused him of being an Indian. Now, he didn't look particularly Indian, but his daughter could have played Hiawatha with no makeup easily. But no, we didn't have any Indian blood until we did. Sooner or later you just fess up and go ahead and with that. I get a kick out of the notion that when we chalk up our heritage and stuff, I will always be able to say that I'm not quite white. Because those who are all white, honestly, without fudging, they don't have that good a reputation. And at this point, I have to tell a joke, and I honestly, I truly don't want to offend anybody, but it was just so funny, and so much a characteristic of our culture, and the way we think, and the ways we find to just not think about a whole lot of things. No, that doesn't exist. I wasn't there. So these aliens come down from space, and they land, and they turn out to be a real kind of a neat bunch of folks. I mean, they're kind, they're generous, they're fun-loving, they're intelligent, and they start building themselves quite a reputation for being just kind of cool folks. And so the Pope decides he'd better meet them and see what they're about. And so they arrange the meeting, and the Pope comes into the room, and he says, "Well, I know we have." Sarah's looking over there. She's looking horrified because she knows I'm telling this joke. Yeah, just try not to laugh at the end. That's all right. So he says, "Well, I know we've got so many things to talk about. I have so many questions and all, but first I must ask, do you know Jesus?" And the guy says, "Jesus? Oh, yeah, we know Jesus. He comes by every couple of years. He comes on. We throw these big parties, and we have these big discussions. Oh, he is such a smart guy. I tell you what, he's really something." Pope says, "Every couple of years?" They said, "Yeah, why?" He says, "Well, he just came here once 2,000 years ago, and we're still waiting for the second coming. And one of the other aliens says, well, it must be the chocolate. He said, chocolate? What do you mean? He said, oh man, he loves chocolate. It's his favorite thing. He said, we have these chocolate festivals, and we make these big boxes of chocolate for him to take home and everything. We send all the chocolate with him. Why? What'd you all do? Kind of makes you stop and think a little, doesn't it? Well, we've always found ways to find fun and find good times in the hardest of circumstances, and I think probably one of the reasons that I've succeeded as well as I have. I sort of became a celebrity at 68, which is an odd time to do that. But it was because of the music, and because they were looking for music that represented the Ozarks, and that's the only music I know really well, and I just happened to be at the right spot at the right time. But when you think about it, there's lots of people in the Ozarks who have become international celebrities from their talents and their intelligence and their music. The old barn dances and the folk singers and May Kennedy McCord. I don't know if you remember her. Vance Randolph, you remember him, and Mrs. Parler. That became the Ozark Jubilee, and the Ozark Jubilee, when its time had passed, eventually became Branson, and because people have no recourse but to keep that music alive and to keep that spirit alive of being able to sing about your hard times and make them better, make them tolerable, make them something that you can laugh about. And I remember my mother laughed at something one time, and I said, "Well, that's sad." I said, "You're laughing at something that's sad." And she said, "Oh, honey," she said, if I started to cry, I'd never stop." I thought, "Whoa, I'm in a different place than I thought I was. Maybe I better look at this again." And sure enough, the Ozarks is a whole pattern of people holding each other together, and being there in hard times, and taking over a plate of something when somebody's ill, or if somebody has passed, and looking over. Taking care of folks when they're not able to take care of themselves. And I'm going to say something that some people may take as political, and I don't see it that way at all. I see it as sociology. We have a whole debate going on here about whether or not there are people who are getting too much. The poor people are getting too much. The poor people are stealing. They're shiftless and lazy. I'm here to tell you that the last lazy hillbilly died a long time ago, because you can't live in this country and be lazy. You can't live in these rocks and make a living and call it a living unless you're tough as nails, unless you're willing to work long hours and see the beauty in hard work and see the character building that goes on from trying things that are impossible and just doing them anyway because you don't have choice. There may be somebody someplace that's lazy. I haven't met any of them yet. I've met people that are pitiful, people that can't do for themselves, people that wouldn't know how to take care of themselves. But of course, that's my perspective, because not because of my politics, but because I grew up with Perry and Polly Boyd, and I grew up with little Roberta, who was my playmate when I was a child. She was about this tall. And I was astonished to find that she was 43 years old. Now, is she lazy? I don't think so. Perry and Polly married, I don't know how. They had a car, I don't know how. They could barely figure out how to take care of themselves. And the whole town took care of them. When Perry and Polly's house burned down on a winter night and killed 7 of their 13 dogs, The next morning, while the ashes were still hot, people were there with boards and bricks and plumbing fixtures, and they built them a house that day. Now, they said if we hadn't, they'd have had to move in with us. But still, bless his heart, Perry Boyd, they heated with coal. And so far as I know, nobody ever recorded any instance where Perry had taken a bath. And over the years, he turned to kind of this odd pale blue color from the coal dust, and that's just, it's kind of a patina all over him. And I went to their house once because they'd gotten something in a package in the mail, and my mother asked me to take it down there. My grandma said, "Now don't you dare go in that house, you'll catch the brown critters." I had no idea what that meant, but I didn't go in the house. I didn't want to take a chance. But I did see inside the house, and I thought they had a felt carpet, and I realized long years later that it was dog hair that had collected, because I don't know that Polly knew to sweep a floor. They were just barely able to feed themselves, and they got little checks in the mail, But God love them. I mean, they toiled at what they knew how to do, and worked very hard to try to be smart enough to feed themselves and to not get in bad trouble. They did get in trouble once, but there was another couple that was a little bit like them that were they were a little cleaner, but they were still people that were definitely what you would call differently abled. And they too had a car, and I don't know how that happened. But one couple went to town, and they were coming back from town, and the other couple decided, well, they could go to town too. So they started out to town, and they met on the highway, and they were real excited to meet, and they got to waving at each other and hollering out, and they, at least one of the drivers forgot to drive, and they ran into each other. And there was a new highway patrolman come to Cashville. I forget the fellow's name. He didn't last long. But he came out to work the accident and everything, and he was trying to get them to explain what happened, and he's looking around, and none of them have any teeth, and they're all talking at once, and they can't talk plain. And Polly had a nervous habit of pulling her hair, and so she was bald, and her scarf fell back, and he saw that she was bald, and she also had a pet rat that she carried with her places, and he's trying to figure out what's happening, and Polly gets concerned because he's looking so distraught, and so she reaches up and she pats him on the arm, and he looks around looking for sympathy, and here's the rat sitting on her shoulder. You know that little corner drugstore down there where the bus used to stop there in Cashville, right there off the square? That patrol was in there a few days later, and somebody said, "Well, you settling in okay?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm still trying to figure out what's going on." He says, "What is this Butterfield? Is it some kind of a home or something?" Well, it was home to them, But I don't know. I think we're all doing the best we can. I know I am. Well, we have a history that we talk about. We have a history that our folks talked about. We have a history that nobody talked about. I was given to know that there were no slaves in this part of the country. They were all over this part of the country. We just didn't talk about it. We went over to, every time we had a family reunion every 5 or 6 years, we'd go over to Newtonia. I don't know if anybody knows where that is. It's western Missouri, kind of southwest of Monette, between Monette and Neosho, that area over there on the prairie. And my mother's folks were all over there. That's where my Granny Luke lived, and where she met her husband that was my grandfather, or my great-grandfather. And Newtonia was the nearest town. And There's some of the folks are buried over there, some buried at Newtonia, some at Diamond, but we would go to Diamond to put flowers on the grave of my great-grandfather, Mark Gentry. And then we'd go over to Newtonia because my Aunt Bebe and her husband had lived in the brick house that had been the Union headquarters during the Civil War. And it still had mini balls and cannonballs stuck in the walls. And it was kind of an amazing place. They're trying to turn it into a national park or a national site of some kind. But we'd go over there, because we'd heard all these stories about it, and we noticed that there was a family cemetery, but it was all grown up around it, but you could see the stones in there. Last time I went over, just a few years ago, somebody had bought that property and cleaned it up, and cut away all the brush and cleaned out around the cemetery and everything. And I discovered that outside the cemetery, there was another cemetery. Outside the fence, there was a cemetery that was just field stones for markers. And that's where the slaves were buried. No names on them, just little markers. But that much of a token of respect, I thought it was pretty cool. And we have all kinds of stories about the slaves who were here and the slaves who came through here. Over where I live, east of where I live, there's a little town called Elsinore, and it's a marker. It's one of the still existent markers on the Bellevue Trail. Has anybody heard of that? It was a trail that ran all the way from Alabama to St. Louis, up through Batesville, Arkansas, and then along eastern Missouri, always west of Crowley's Ridge, because the land is rough through there, and you could get places and not be seen. And the slaves would come up through there on their way to freedom in groups, because it was such a wild, woody area. You could stay in undercover for a good length of time, but of course you need food eventually. And the story of Elsinore is that there was a peach farmer there. He had a big peach orchard, and he had slaves that cared for his peach orchard and that he had little cabins for. But the thing was, he didn't have any slaves. A group would come in and they'd work there and pretend to be in the peach orchard, and they'd get rested up and fed and get their wounds taken care of, and then they'd move on when the next group came. And so, because white people tend to think that people of other colors all look alike, nobody noticed. So his set of slaves just changed for another set and another set and another set, and who knows how many hundreds of people came through there and were fed and got across the line that way. And that's part of our history too. So, and we have this area up to the north and west of us that I helped edit a book about this last month, that the area of the border wars, and I don't think many people even know about that Missouri and Kansas had their own civil war, that they fought back and forth and killed each other and killed families. It was just an astonishing number of people who died up there in an area north of the Missouri River called Little Dixie, because people had come in there from the south and found those big bottomlands there, said, hey, we can raise corn and cotton here. And they did. And they brought in slaves to help with that market economy there. And then you had a whole bunch of abolitionists and a few Unitarians who are always causing trouble. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a Unitarian lay minister, and she's asking me, about how the direction that my beliefs go in general. I'm saying, I know you grew up Methodist, and what do you think now? I said, I spent a good deal of time with the Quakers, and I really admire them, but I don't think I'm good enough to be a Quaker. She said, well, you should be a Unitarian. She said, Unitarians are just Quakers who won't shut up. But I don't know where I was going with that. beliefs and troublemakers and stuff. But the abolitionists over in Kansas, the trouble with belief systems is that in order to make them work, you have to believe a certain amount of things that just aren't so or aren't possible. And you have to take into account and make some reasonable excuse for human nature, which is, as you know, a little rocky. You know, I mean, you have times when I don't know, I say you, I'm talking about me. There are times when I go through a situation and I do what I think I should do, and I come out of it thinking, well, that was the right thing to do. And then there are times when I pass a mirror and I say, you slug. Or sometimes I say, you coward. You greedy pig. What's the matter with you? And I always say, I'm just human, you know. Sometimes I can do it right, and sometimes I just can't. Sometimes I don't want to. But they never took into account human nature, because they'd send people over to Little Dixie, the abolitionists would. They'd send bands of people over to free the slaves. Well, while they were there, why couldn't they free a few livestock and maybe a wagon or two, and how about that corn crop? And, you know, they all just turned into people who decided they could take from each other because they didn't like each other. So you're the bad side, I'm the good side, so I get your stuff. And it turned into an ugly, ugly situation. The only thing that surmounted that in Missouri history, and actually Ozarks history, was the Fleetwood-Alsop feud. Has anybody heard of that? No? The feud between the Alsop family and the Fleetwood family, which started with a Fleetwood boy and a couple of his friends beating the tar out of an Alsop boy and sending him home bloody. His father came over to the family to talk about it, and they didn't want to hear about it, and worse, they laughed at him, and so he shot one of them. That was in 1820. The last known murder in that feud was in 1932. And I am certain there have been some since. But that was us. That was all us. That took place between about Gainesville, Missouri, down through Mountain Home and up into Mountain Grove, Missouri, and all that territory in there. Just people, oh, you're also, bang. 100 and some years. Killed more people than were killed in the entire Civil War in this part of the country. We know people in Europe who are duking it out over things that happened in 1200 AD. You know, that's same stuff. Same stuff. They don't remember anymore what that was about. You know, that's just what you do until you can figure out some reason why you don't, and that sometimes takes generations. But we know so little about what drives us, and I want to make the point here before I forget it, before I get wandering off too much, that places like this museum, are so important to carrying on the knowledge, the information. You know, I found a picture of a bunch of Siscos in the other room when I came down. I have no idea who they are or who they're attached to, but they're Sisco and they're from this part of the country. They're us. I tried to disavow a whole section of Siscos once, and it just didn't work. I got over to Howe County, which is a total Republican county, so they were for the Union, and next door to them is Oregon County, which was for the South. They're Democrats, and started to work for the newspaper, and people would come up to me, and they all had the same tone of voice. It was the same look, same tone of voice. They'd give me one of these, you know. One of those where they usually say, "You're not from here, are you?" You know. And they'd say, "Are you one of them Siscos from over at Alton?" I'd say, "I don't think so. I don't believe so. They might be kin to us way back, but I don't think so." And so finally, I went to a Sisco family reunion, and my father's cousin Joanne said, "Meredith, aren't there Siscos over there where you live?" I said, "Well, there's Siscos, but I don't think they're related to us." She said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, from what I understand, they're a little bit ornery. She said, Meredith, your great-grandmother is your great-grandmother because your great-grandfather took her fiancé hunting and the fiancé didn't come home. I said, we might be related to him. Yeah. And it turns out we are. I finally figured it out. If you go over west here on 412 to Osage, that's the Sisco family cemetery. And it goes all the way back to Granville Sisco, who would have been my great-grandfather. And he's also the ancestor of the Siscos Dalton. So that's we separated back then, but I guess I still have to claim them. And they're not that bad. They're just Democrats. I mean, nothing wrong with that. Well, I'm going to open it up for questions here in just a little bit, but I want to give another example of how it is and why it is that we get our history so muddled sometimes. We're not like the protagonist in 100 Years of Solitude, who was able to keep track of everything that had happened in the town that he lived in because he never died. Everybody else would die and move on and forget, but he didn't die, and so he had all the memories. We don't have that luxury. So if we don't have places to put our history, and if we don't have the impulse or the curiosity to study our history and learn about who we are and where we're from, things get away from us. And I ran into another circumstance where that was so. Of course, I've sing folk songs. I don't test them to see if they're from the Ozarks. I just, if I like them, I sing them. But there was one song that everybody likes, and it's the song that I always burst into when we get to Jeff City and we drive across the river. We go across the Missouri River, and I always sing the song that ends with "Across the Wide Missouri." That's a cool thing to do. But I went up to St. Joseph here year before last, I guess it was, to talk to some folks, and I was there at a conservation nature center, which was where some of the programs were taking place that I was talking about. And they had this great facility. There was a facility sort of like this. They had mostly focused on the history and the natural history of that area. But the area was prone to flooding, and so it was built up on pilings. And these folks that I was talking to were river keepers. They're people that go out and clean up portions of the river, and the conservation department comes along and brings john boats for them to travel in and big dumpsters for them to put the garbage they find in. And so they spend a couple of days, generally in cold weather, out pulling, what are they called, cars that are, they don't say used cars anymore, they say pre-owned. Yeah, they were pre-owned baby diapers and pre-owned mattresses and the like, out of the river. And it's a brave thing to do. And in the time in between, they were able to camp underneath the pilings of this building. And so it was just a big flat place in there, and they were able to cook their meals and stay out of the weather and stay in their tents and stuff. But that night, in between the 2 days of river prowling, they built a big campfire and were sitting out there on the riverbank. And they got to talking about what that riverbank was. That place right there was the place where the wagons went across when people came from the east going toward the frontier, and they crossed the river at that point, and beyond there was no map. But imagine, it would be like getting on a ship to Mars for us, They had no idea. They were going to a place they'd never seen. They didn't know if they'd live, and they were looking at this big wide river. It was carrying logs down it and God knows what else. And they were thinking back to the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia, where they had come from, where it was all settled and it was pretty and it was calm. It was a gentle, friendly country. And so they wrote a song about it. And then the song became popular. And it got picked up by the riverboat workers and taken to New Orleans. And then it was learned there by the sailors who turned it into a sea shanty and took it all the way to England. Then they got to England, and they didn't know what it was about. It didn't make any sense to them. And so they threw in an Indian princess and, I love your daughter and all that. It was never in the song to begin with. It was never. The words to the original song have been lost for centuries. And it got turned into what became a nonsense song because it doesn't make any sense. It's pretty, but it doesn't make any sense. So I sat down that night by the firelight. I had a notebook in my pocket and a piece of paper, and I thought, well, what would I say if I was standing here? What would I sing about? What does Shenandoah mean to me? And so I rewrote the words, and they're not actually they're on the new album. Yeah, I don't remember now what I was going to call this album, but after cancer treatment, I called it Still Standing, and it's got a picture of a house that hasn't quite fallen down yet on the front of it. But this song is on there. I apologize for having no accompaniment, but I'm going to give it a try. Oh, Shenandoah, that's the wrong key. Oh, Shenandoah, there it is. I long to see you away, you rolling river. My Shenandoah, I'll always grieve you away. I'm bound away across the wide Missouri. Oh, Shenandoah, I long to hear you, your water song, you singing river. My roving heart is always near you. Away, I'm bound away across the wide Missouri. For many years I've been a wanderer, far away on mighty rivers, seeking my fate somewhere out yonder. Away, I'm bound away across the wide Missouri. I left my home, I left my family, never more to see their faces, for the sirens call of far-off places. Away, I'm bound away across the wide Missouri. Away, I'm bound away across the wide Missouri. Thank you. Thank you. So, questions? You have questions? Tell us about Jennifer Lawrence. It is her name. She's a good kid. She's a good kid. She's extremely down to earth. Surprisingly so, lots of times. I think she's as much surprised at her level of fame as everybody else is, because she says, it's just a job. It's a weird job, but it's just a job, and that's, I try to show up with my lines memorized and on time, and then we just go from there. She said, I never know how it's going to turn out.
Who taught her how to skin a squirrel?
The little girl. That whole film was made without sets, as we think of sets. They went to people's homes and rented their homes. They went in their closets and bought their clothes. Wow. And they Teardrop's Carhartt jacket, that old worn out thing, they traded that out of somebody's closet, and they bought the guy a new one. And that's pretty well the way it happened. The little girl was there at the beginning of the rehearsals as a consultant because she lived in that house. She could tell them where everything was and how it worked. And as time went on, the casting was taking place, and the parts actually called for 2 young boys. And Jennifer went to the director and she said, "There's no reason why this girl can't play one of these parts because she already knows it all. We're not going to have to teach her anything." And they said, "Well, let's do it then." And yeah, she was a neat little kid. She really jumped in. And that scene at the end where she picks up the banjo and starts to play, they didn't tell her to do that. She just did it. And then somebody said cut, and Deborah said, no, leave that alone. Let's just film until it's done.
Tell us one story you'll never forget about filming Winter's Bone.
Oh, wow. There are just so many. I'll tell you one about the filming, and then I will tell you one about stuff that happened later, because I also went all over the country and actually to Italy at one point to represent the film at various festivals before the Oscars came up. And the night that we filmed, they told us to come and be there at 7:15, and we'd start filming at 7:30, and we'd be done by 9:30. Well, in the meantime, they got a call, or Jennifer got a call from L.A. that they wanted her there in L.A. the next morning at 9 o'clock for an audition for the Hunger Games. And she said, well, yeah. So she had some more shots to do, and so they went ahead and filmed all the things with her. So we didn't get started until about 10 o'clock. And we went into this house that was in poor shape, and they couldn't have any heat on because it was a wood stove, and they had the camera set up in that room, and they couldn't do that. So we were in there in the cold and playing, and we played for a couple hours, them running the scene, filming the girls coming through the room and into the next room, and getting the sound right with the changes into the next room. And then we took a break at 11 and went out to this tent where they had one of those barn heaters that's like a jet engine that blows it wasn't touching the cold. It was probably 25 degrees, something like that out there. We went out there and sat around and waited for them to reset the mics and the lights and everything. And then we came back, and then they filmed it with the camera from the other direction. And then we filmed it again with the camera just on us. And then they filmed it again with the camera behind us and getting the people. And altogether, and then they took a break for pizza because they hit their 8 hours. They couldn't have 8 hours on the camera without having a meal. So they stopped and had pizza. And then they stopped again at 1:30 to have the regular dinner that had come down from Springfield on a catering truck, and that was a big pasta meal with espresso and nice stuff. Then went back in and finished some more. We finally got back to the hotel at 4:30 in the morning. And knowing that they were still going to film right on through till dawn, And when you see the amount of work that goes into a scene that lasts less than a minute, it was just extraordinary. Plus, in the film, you come in the door, she looks to the side, and there's people there playing cards. Then she goes on into the room where the musicians are. Those people playing cards did that another day in another building. When she looks to the right, there's nothing there. They plugged that in. So I didn't know that until we got to Sundance. So seeing the film in its entirety, I was just stunned. I had no idea they were that good, and that they could portray the Ozarks in such a way that I couldn't find fault with it anywhere. I tried. So, these folks are all from New York, and how are they going to know this? But they did. Now here's my story from the tour, which is probably the high point of everything for me, was when after the movie, this woman dressed very nicely stood up in the back of the theater that was in the basement of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, and we had just watched this film, and we were doing the Q&A, And she stands up and she says, I don't mean to be offensive, but do you actually have people like that living in the Ozarks? I said, well, yeah. And she said, what do you call those people? And I said, neighbors. Somebody else over here was a...
Do you have any stories from the 70s back to the land thing?
Oh, Lord. Well, see, I left the Ozarks in 65, so that I was in San Francisco when the hippies got there, you know, and I knew of all this stuff, the anti-war stuff, and the civil rights stuff, and the women's music, and the free speech, and all those things were happening in Berkeley to people that I knew, you know, and I had a good friend who had the double curse of being a newsman with a camera on his shoulder and a gay man who was very obviously gay. And he was filming the riots over in Berkeley. And so I was getting my news from him, and he would tell what was going on over there, and then I'd watch the 6 o'clock news, and they didn't say anything about that. They talked about, they interpreted what was going on as something wholly different, you know, and they'd have Spiro Agnew up there shaking his fist and talking about law and order, and meanwhile, I knew the Berkeley cops were beating the crap out of people with nightsticks, and they never showed it. They never showed it. And there was rioting down in Oakland with the black community getting out of hand and starting to what had became the Black Panthers, that whole movement that way. And so what I was seeing there on the ground was a whole different world from what was being described on national television, and I was horrified. And so I started going back and listening to more of these folks and listening to what they had to say and thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it and trying to understand, trying to get a clear picture in my head of what was actually going on as opposed to what the news was telling me. And I think that's probably why I got into the news later, because I was so offended by the kinds of things that were being told as being the facts on the ground when they weren't, when they just flat weren't. I was seeing the opposite from where I stood. And so by the time I came back to the Ozarks in 1976, we had that period when Martin Luther King was shot and Bobby Kennedy was shot, and I think I'll probably remember that until I die as one of the great tragedies of my life. You know, going to sleep seeing that he'd just won in California and waking up to find out he's dead. So many of us who were hoping that he would turn the country into a better way, and at least we knew that he had been to the South and he had seen the conditions there, and that when he stepped out in favor of civil rights, that he was talking from an honest perspective. He was not being a politician, you know. And when he died, a lot of us just sat down what we were doing and said, "I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not gonna partake. I can't. You know, there's no weapon to fight against this willful deceit about the differences between what we actually do as a country and what we are told we're doing." So when I came back to the Ozarks in 1976, I was pretty burned out, and I was surprised more than probably anybody I know that I got here to meet all the people who had left San Francisco before me, and only the ones that came to the Ozarks for here were people from places like Michigan and Detroit, where the civil rights riots had been, and they were suffering from the same double image, that the image of what happens on the streets and the image of what you see on TV, and it's nowhere near the same, and it's not. After a while, you get to the point where you know that you can't. It's not a misunderstanding. They're not misunderstanding what they're seeing. They're telling you something else because they don't want to talk about what's happening on the street. It's too scary. And so you get told this other picture of things. And that changed my whole life. And I got back to the Ozarks and discovered that a whole lot of other people had had the same experience, and we're trying to. It was a kind of. It was like post-traumatic stress because you have an image of what you've always seen the world to be, and then you see behind the curtain, and then what does anything you believe mean anymore? How is that valid anymore? How do you where do you put things? What really is important? What is real patriotism, and what is the sham and the dance? And say, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Look over here. That it was. I think most of the people I came back here, a lot of them were making their living by growing weed, But if you lose your image of who you are and who your country is, it's a fair anesthetic. And a lot of people, I think, spent a lot of years smoking because they could smoke instead of think, because they didn't like where that went. So I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for or not. You kind of sent me someplace I didn't expect to go.
Do you think some of the political things that are going on in our country now are very similar to some of the things that went on in the 70s?
I think they're worse. And the reason I think so is because we should know better by now. We should know better. We should know better than to fall for the things that are being told on the news. I was a journalist for 20 years, and a good part of that time I was an investigative journalist, and finding the bad folks and putting them away, that kind of stuff, And fortunately, I was never put in the position where I had to tell something was false or had to participate in something that was false. But I had a boss whose grandfather founded the Missouri School of Journalism. He was as hard-ass as you could find, pardon my French. And there was one situation where I made somebody mad who was really powerful, and he said, I don't know what we need to do about this because I think he might come after you. I said, well, I'm unarmed. And he reached in his desk and pulled out a gun and handed it to me. He said, carry this until you don't need to anymore. And I carried it for about 6 months. And I watched my rear view mirror very closely. But that guy's broke now and in jail. So.
Yeah. Why do you think that the mainstream media, passes what they pass on to us, and do they not know the truth, or do you think that?
I think that the mainstream media is owned by large corporations who will tell you what they want you to know. Absolutely, it's all driven by money. There are a few journalists around that argue it. If it were me, now I don't know. See, we're getting to politics now. I would say to do an experiment. We're told about the left-wing media. Okay, if you want an experience with the left-wing media, watch Democracy Now! On the Free Speech Channel. That's left-wing media. If you want to see something that is moderate left-leaning, listen to Rachel Maddow. She has a PhD and is a Rhodes Scholar in political science. She does not lie. She doesn't have to. They pay her well. And she has some integrity. And she tells things that are scary enough that she has to be watched by her company. She has to not let anybody know where she lives. Somebody shoot her. And if you want to find out what is being called left-wing media and what is pure corporate stuff, watch Fox News. They don't just tell the parts that they want to tell. They make stuff up regularly. And if you had a dictionary and access to Google, you could catch them at it. I mean, it's not that hard. They're not sneaking around. They're just making up stuff. And it's up to you to find out the difference between what they're saying and what's there. But, I mean, if we can if we can fail to do immigration, and we can fail to do food stamps, and we can fail to deal with huge environmental disasters that are happening in our country, but we still have plenty of money to have our congressmen sit up there and vote against Obamacare 41 times and not do another damn thing, then, something is broken. And a lot of the people that drive what's broken are the people who are extremely misinformed and extremely ignorant and self-serving, and they're in charge, The only thing you can do about that is vote.
We've got one last question. I think we'll.
So, looking at the future, in respect to the past.
Oh Lord. Okay.
So this area, Northwest Arkansas, kind of on the edge of the Ozarks, is exploded with growth, and there's a lot of progress. Things are moving ahead. What kind of wisdom can we gain from the history so that we don't make the mistakes of North Carolina or West Virginia, to take care of the land, take care of the culture? I know that's kind of a huge question.
It is. Let me, if we have time, you bear with me, let me tell you a story about something that happened in the Ozarks east of here. Northeast of here. Back in the 1940s, late 1940s, early 1950s, the National Park Service cast its eye upon an area of the Ozarks that they thought was incredibly beautiful and unspoiled. And they said, let's make a national park there. Let's save that. Well, that's okay in the boardrooms. But when you look at the National Park Service, every agent of the National Park Service that works as a ranger in the field has gone through not environmental training, but police training. So they come down to the Ozarks, and they take this land away by eminent domain from people who have starved out and dug themselves out of holes in order to hold on to that land and hold on to that beautiful, pristine place and take care of it. They just took it away from them, moved them out, put them in jail if they argued. And they went around to all the areas. Now, this is a huge, long riverway. Went around to all the areas just outside the park and told the farmers there that they either had to paint their barns brown or they would tear them down because they didn't want them to be seen inside the park, from inside the park. No money, just get rid of that barn. Arrogant jackasses, every one of them. To the point where when Stuart Udall came down from the Department of the Interior to float the river and see the pristine beauty, there were so many booby traps in the river they couldn't let him go. They meant to kill him. Now, that's us. That's how we are here, But you come 30, 40 years forward, and a company that I believe is funded. It's funded by a lot of people, but funded the beginning funding, I believe, was from Dan Quayle's family, who was a newspaper family, but they were championing conservative views and didn't want people to mess with their vast holdings of land out in the West, and they formed this nonprofit group called the People of the West, to keep legislators out there from passing any laws that would regulate the use of that land. That became the property rights people who are here in the Ozarks. And they're all the way from Springfield east, and they have meetings and they shake their fists and claim to be patriots, and they have a whole bunch of members that are right straight out of the Klan. And they tell these stories around the Ozarks about how you mustn't let this happen. You mustn't let this happen because they're out to get us. They're just all out to get us. You've got to stop them. They told people over there where I live that they were going to, the Man in the Biosphere project that the United Nations did to recognize places that are unspoiled, that the United States had signed over the rights to that part of the country to the United Nations. They were going to move out all the people. And this is true. They're going to move out all the people, and so that the critters would all be safe, and they could keep it all pristine and safe from humans, And they had already built buildings to keep these people in, and they called them apartments. And people bought it. You know, I have people living in my county that have never been outside the county. You have here too. You have up around Cassville where we grew up. People that have never been anywhere else. And they think in the old ways, and God bless them for it. There's no reason to fault that. However, when somebody comes in and tells you a bunch of big fat lies that make you think you're about to lose your property, then you're going to start making decisions that are not necessarily in your own best interest, but they're in theirs. I'm telling you, beware those organizations that try to make you into a patriot, because that's not what it's about. They just want you to be theirs. They want you to be theirs. So, that's what I would say about the future.
This podcast was produced by the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History. We welcome your comments. You can email us at Shiloh, that's SHILOH, at springdalear.gov. If you'd like more information about our podcast series or about the museum in general, you can visit our website at www.shilohmuseum.org.